All right, guys. So today I have my brother Brown. Brother, how are you?
I'm doing well, Thomas.
Yep,
We
that's right. That's right.
apparently we're some distance away from each other. I'm in Florida, and I understand that you're in California, but LA, right?
That's right. That's right. Brother Austin wasn't able to jump into the camera. We're having a
Yeah.
lot of difficulties with his well, not only his, I think mine as well. My reception is or my internet connection is not the best. But we thought about just doing the voice. So at some point, that's what we're thinking of doing, but I think we'll try this for a little bit. If this doesn't work, then we'll just do a voice recording. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, you are very welcome. I'm so glad to have you here on a very wonderful topic. So when I posted on Instagram, hey guys, I'm gonna be reviewing this book. Real quick, I was like, I need to have Austin Brown join us. A lot of people were like, what is that? What's going on there? Like, are you a four
Yeah.
pointer? Are you what's going
It's
on?
a cheeky title, isn't it?
Oh, it
It's a
is.
little spicy.
No, it is. It is. It truly is. Now, one thing though for sure is that I do want everyone to know this is an in-house uh debate. I'm not gonna be debating my brother Austin. I am not a debater at all. But we will be having a discussion on this on his latest book. It's called A Boisterously Reformed Polemic Against Limited Atonement. And for the particulars, a particular atonement, and for others, the definite atonement. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
this is a hot topic. I'm so glad that um, I've had people. I have done videos and interviews with people that I don't agree with 100%. Um, of like, for example, like things of eschatology or things of
Mm,
on regards to baptism. Um,
hmm.
and then so I am not I'm not like like new to like being in disagreement with the people that I talk about. But this being a topic which a lot of people, like the majority of people, are in disagreement with, and my brother Austin knows that I am in disagreement. Like I wasn't persuaded, but I have to be honest, it was a great read, I think, and I recommend this book if you want to know what um we'll get into the terms here in a little bit, but if you want to know what people that don't believe in limited atonement believe in, I think this is a great book to start with. It's a book that's really gonna challenge you as it challenged me. I think it's in all honesty, one of those better books that I read on the subject. There are a few claims in the book that we're going to talk about all of this. So I'm also
Yeah.
not trying to be in this conversation for 2 hours. So we're gonna get into the meat of this conversation here pretty quickly. But I wanted to really extend my gratitude towards my brother Austin Brown. Like he's been very, very humbled and very patient towards me. I mean, from the day that I reached out to him, like, hey, I see you wrote this book, I want to read it, I want to review it. uh can you let me do that? And man, like I'm so grateful that you sent me this book. um I've always said that you know like learning about different subjects, like honestly, if it doesn't challenge you, it should at least help you learn a lot of stuff. But anyways, i
Well,
spoke i spoke way too much.
no, no,
I
you're
want
good.
to
But let
hear
me
from you
just
now.
say, yeah, let me just say my heartfelt gratitude to you as well. Because as soon as we spoke on the phone the first time, I was like, oh, now here's a man who has the spirit of God in him, humble, clearly loves Christ. So um, I count you a brother. And if we disagree, I mean, my goodness, uh, that's just that's just the nature of this pilgrim's walk, isn't it? I mean, we're
Right,
all just
right,
trying to figure out our way.
right. And I will say this though, for those who don't know you, do you mind giving a little introduction to yourself? We
Sure.
did talk beforehand, and honestly, um, we're both wanting to we both want to honor God and everything we say and do.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm very appreciative of you taking the time and joining us today.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not one of these guys who can boast of having all kinds of letters next to my name. So instead of trying to act like I'm something that I'm not, I'll just say, well, I'm a mailman. I was a mailman right out of high school because I wanted to marry my high school sweetheart, Rebecca, and that happened. But what I didn't realize, what carrying the mail would do for me, is give me about 6 hours a day to listen to stuff. And that was right at the advent when the internet was really taking off. And so I've just over the years been devouring lectures and sermons and podcasts and all the rest. And so, if you were to say, what are you? What are you about? Well, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a churchman. I've been a deacon in the church. I was ordained in the Presbyterian Church of America. Church life is essential to me. I love theology. I love philosophy, and I want to see God's kingdom grow. So I'm a servant, is what I am.
All right. So I wanted to say, so you can buy this book online. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you can buy this book online on Amazon. So I went and check out the Amazon, and usually what I do is I check out the author's biography or the author's, like, the section of the author. And let me say, I was very surprised. Like I got to learn a lot about your life through that. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know if you wrote it, or
Yeah,
you had
that was
someone
me.
else write it. And it was pretty long, but it was like I was like, oh man, like we got a lot in common. But anyways, another thing I was gonna say, as I'm reading this book, I kept laughing. Like there's a few things in here. Um, One of the things that I learned from, I don't know if you ever heard of Pastor Montoya. Pastor Montoya,
I haven't.
he's a great pastor. He was a teacher at TMU, at the Master's Seminary, the
Okay.
Master's University. And
Mm-hmm.
then I got to meet him like more than a few times, and I spent good time with him, talking with him, and I remember one time we were talking. This was years ago. We were like having a conversation, and then all of a sudden a guy comes in, right, and he says, Pastor, like, I love how you preach. He says, you're so funny when you preach. And then, like, I know in a different context, like you could take that as an offense, or it didn't come out right, to for sure, or you could take it as a joke. But he said, he looked at the guy and he said, good. He said, sometimes you have to disarm him first, then to attack him.
Mm-hmm.
And then so so I definitely felt the spear. um you would disarm, at some point, would be very cheeky, very funny in some sections, and then all of a sudden, like, it felt like a bucket of cold water, like you were serious. So you go from like this one, like, um I would say this, like, very, very funny, to like very serious real quick, where it like
Mm-hmm.
kind of takes you by surprise. And the reason why I'm saying this is because as I read this book, like, it surprised me a whole lot. Like, I had a lot of presuppositions when I came into this book, reading this book, and saying, like, here I'm about to comment about all the bad things, all the things that he has to say. I'm gonna respond to everything he has to say, and I'm not gonna debate you. But you know, as I'm reading the book, I'm like, man, like, this is how I would respond to that. This is how I would respond to that. And then I would say, like, oh, but what about this though? And then, like, two, three lines below, like, you're answering my question from above. So
Mm-hmm.
clearly you have been, clearly you know what you're talking about, and you've been doing this for a long time. And I'm gonna let you speak, because I've been speaking a whole lot, but I'm really excited about this topic. So
uh,
I'm gonna
it's a
let
fun topic. It's a spicy topic.
it is. And then, as we, so I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. So then I go on YouTube and I find your YouTube channel. And
Yeah.
then I started watching your videos, and when you're
Oh
talking about,
boy. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, okay, this video was done 5 years ago. I was like, all right, so he knows what he's talking about, and not because you've spent 20 years doing this, like you know what you're talking about, or you don't know what you're talking about. What I'm saying is this, like, you have been very consistent in this topic.
Mm,
Therefore, what I'm trying to say is this. Therefore, you have thought out of many ways that people can ask you questions. So,
mm,
regardless of what the question is, I'm pretty sure you have an answer for it, because you have been very consistent in this one thing. And I commend you for your conviction is very strong. And I'm humbled by it. I'm humbled by it. So I do believe that we can have a conversation, and without debating, just having a very respectful conversation. With all that
yes.
being said, now I'm done with the introduction. Now we can talk. Now I can let you talk some more. But just wanted to say that I'm very grateful and very humbled that you took for your willingness to join us today.
Well,
So
thank you very much.
yeah.
I really appreciate that. And let me just say, yeah, I did take a pretty, I tried to be humorous because, you don't want to just be mean or a jerk, right? And so humor can be a technique to say something hard, but it not hit real hard. And so I appreciate you saying that, because I worked really hard at trying to frame these things in a way that would shake certain people awake. Because as you know, I mean, I have been talking about this for literally 25 years. And, you know, there are some folks, maybe you've met them on the internet or in life, who get just a little boisterous themselves over this topic. And so, and so I've had some fiery arrows shot my way, and shotguns and pit bulls um, let loose on me, and all the rest. And so I'm, in some ways, I'm fighting fire with fire, but my goal, my aim is to do so in a way that is winsome and playfully tart. That's how I would say it. So, and engaging. I want people to read a book where they don't get bored,
Yeah.
frankly.
No, it was truly engaging. So let me just go over a few things here. So you
Yeah.
have 21 chapters
Yep.
uh with the conclusion and the appendix. Like, I always count those as chapters. So in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
you have like 24 chapters here. 24, 25, that's debatable, of course, but we have at least 21 chapters that are solid 21 chapters. um and then um and then you even, okay, I'm not even gonna talk about the last page, but I like every chapter. Some of them are short, some of them are longer than others. But every chapter, I'll be honest. If I'm a cage stage Calvinist,
Yeah.
I would have fought with you for every single chapter.
Oh, yeah.
I do want to say though, like, there was a few things, and like I said, usually usually I'm the one that the least person that talks a lot, but I'm just truly like, this is a very good subject that I like. I really like this subject.
Yeah.
So you do say though, and now for the assessment, and we're talking about the introduction. This is page one. This is page one.
Yeah.
Okay. It
Mm,
says, and now for the statement: Christ
mm,
died for the sins of all men. Right. So that's that's what you say. Like, Christ died for all men. His
mm,
shed
mm.
was his blood was shed for
Mm.
the elect and the non-elect.
That's
Correct.
right. Mhm.
Okay.
Yep,
So
that's right.
you're going against limited atonement. The limited atonement says this, that it was shed for only for the elect.
That's right. So, yeah, so let me just say one thing here. Right. Limited atonement, because people have kind of given me some pushback on, like, hey, man, you don't actually disagree with limited atonement, like the
Mhm.
second head of
Right,
door.
right.
And that's true. That's true. What I'm disagreeing with is the common understanding of limited atonement. And that is, did Christ suffer and pay an objective price for the sins of all men, or the elect only? If somebody answers the elect only, I call that limited atonement. And that's the definition I'm working with
Mhm.
in the book.
Yeah, and you explain this very well, very quickly at the very beginning of the book. And so I guess what we're talking about here is the extent of the to whom the atonement is effectual, right?
Yeah.
And then and I did think there was a statement that you made here that I don't know if I agree 100%, and I'm trying to find it here. Usually I have the physical book, and I should have bought it
Uh,
so that I
yeah.
made all my notes here. But
Hmm.
there is a page here, if you don't mind me going over it.
Sure.
um you said, I believe it's still page 1. Check that out. All
Mm,
right. So you
okay.
say, but we're not here to hand out the dunce caps just yet. I'm not even gonna say what you meant by that, but they are being held in storage, is in storage until the end, which you do, like bring out. It says, what must come first is a reason or series of
Yeah.
reasons why many of the
Hmm.
reform err on this point. Notice that I didn't say all the reform err on this
Hmm.
point. While it's something on of a fad of the modern era to conveniently forget or ignore uncomfortable historical facts. The truth is that various stalwarts, if I'm saying that correctly,
Yep.
of, of
Hmm.
their of the reformed tradition happily embraced universal satisfaction. And
Right.
then here's the list that may take a lot of people aback: is
Yeah.
Calvin.
Hmm.
So you're so basically you're saying that all these people agree with you. Um,
I'm saying that these people would affirm universal satisfaction because obviously these names are going to differ on various particulars all over the map. But I'm
right.
just saying when it comes to the specific question, did they believe in limited satisfaction or unlimited satisfaction? I would say these men espouse a very, I would say, sufficiently clearly unlimited satisfaction
Okay, so
or
would you
universal satisfaction.
right, right. So you would say that they're not, maybe I'm not understanding correctly here. Would you say then that they're
Mhm.
not, they didn't believe in limited atonement?
Well, see, that goes back to if we define, so here's the thing every Calvinist, every Reformed person is going to agree on.
Mhm.
Is the atonement effectual for some people? In other words, will some
Mhm.
people infallibly be saved by virtue of Christ's atonement? We all say yes. So, in that sense, everybody would be limited atonement if that's all it meant. But most people understand it as, in combination with that, is that Jesus offered his sacrifice, in a limited way in terms of satisfaction or expiation. He did not die for the sins of the non-elect.
Mm.
So if that, if those two ideas are limited atonement, then yes, I would say these men disagree. But I think historically speaking, if we look at the Council of Dort and the second head of doctrine, they framed it in such a way that people in my camp and people who believe in strict limited atonement, let's say, could sign on in good faith. So yeah, I'm merely saying that there are men like Calvin, Edwards, Charles Hodge, Dabney, Shedd, Ursinus, Musculus, just these different individuals, respected individuals, Luther, who would say that, that central question, for whose sins did Jesus suffer and pay an objectively sufficient price? I would say that these men clearly would say all men.
Oh
Does that
man.
make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's just that, when you said Edwards, like I
Mm,
did, like, it didn't settle very well with me, right?
mm,
So I do want to say, like, of course, a lot of presupposition on my end because I'm a 5 pointer and then I'm a limited atonement guy.
hmm hmm
So of course I have presuppositions. So I read, Edwards, that you saying Edwards, and I'm sorry, I'm not mad. I'm just have an accent. No, like you say Edwards, I'm like, "Oh, Edwards. What do you mean Edwards?"
Like, how
Um,
dare you say that?
yeah, like, yeah. How dare you say it? Right? No, but the reason why I'm saying that though, because I'm pretty sure you read of Matthew, or you heard of Matthew Everhart. He's at Jonathan Edwards. I want to say he's like one of the best after John Gerstner. That John Gerstner was one of
Hmm.
those guys. Um, and I did ask him. I was like, "Do you think that Jonathan Edwards?" And maybe I asked the question. Maybe I didn't ask it correctly, because what I asked him was like, "Do you believe that was was Jonathan Edwards a not limited atonement guy?" He was like, "No, by no means." Like he said, at the end of the freedom of the will, on the conclusion side, he says that he's a limited atonement guy.
Yeah,
Um,
and see, that's where definitions, because that's where, if there's a weakness of my book, I would say it is the fact that I say I'm combating atonement. Because here's the thing, if I title the book "A Boisterously Reformed Polemic Against Universal," I'm sorry, against limited satisfaction, many people are going to look at that title and just go,
what?
"What's that?"
Mhm.
Right? Or if I say "A Boisterously Reformed Polemic Against an Owenian View of Limited Atonement,"
Mhm.
they're going to go, "What the heck are you talking about?" Like, so I had to do, in my mind, a title that would punch a bit, that has a
Right.
bit of a kick to it. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I would say, in one, of course, I mean, Jonathan Edwards, since he believes that Christ died especially for the elect, such that they will be infallibly saved, of course he holds to particular redemption or definite atonement.
Mhm.
But I think there are clear passages where he would say that Christ also suffered for the sins of humanity in total.
Right. Right. So we'll keep going.
Yeah,
But
sure.
yeah, so I wanted to bring that up, because it didn't set very well with me. But if you're, as you're saying there, as you're explaining that, I'm like, okay, I could see that. I could see that. I will say, and I'll be very honest, like
Mm,
a lot of the things that you say here were very challenging.
mm,
As I was mentioning before we even started recording, I was saying, there's a few things here that I just assumed in my mind. Um,
mm,
and then as I'm reading the book, I'm like those assumed things were challenged because I never actually meditated on those things, and they were just there, it was just knowledge by assumption. And I
mm,
do and I do believe that there is a lot of that today. I do believe that there is a lot of that, and I think that the best thing of knowing what someone believes is to actually hear them out.
mm,
I'm very grateful for this book. It did challenge me in certain areas. Not, I mean, I wasn't persuaded per se, but I was very happy with this book. Like, I mean, all honesty, I'm like I was saying, I'm gonna buy a physical copy of this book and I'm gonna read it again. And I say that very often, and I do go back and read it again.
hmm.
Because
And I would
go ahead.
just encourage people, if I'm not infallible. I certainly don't claim that. I mean, I've worked hard to try to fairly represent, whether or not someone like Edwards taught these things, but I would just encourage people to be Bereans, as it were, and to, look these things up and explore them on their own and test
Mhm.
whether or not I'm insane or if I'm onto something.
Yeah. So would you consider yourself, because I was a little confused at first, because in the what is this called, man? I keep forgetting every time. I practice these things in my head, and then when I have to say them, like I forget them.
Hmm.
And when, like, for example, you have this authors recommending your book, right?
Hmm.
The endorsements.
Yes.
There is okay. So at some point, one of the authors calls you an ami. I can't
Oh yeah, Emeraldian, right?
em,
Hmm. Hmm.
emerald emerald Amiraldian. So
Yes, you got it.
Amiraldianism. Um.
Mm.
So and then you say in page 5, you say, as has already been imitated.
Yeah.
intimated, I land squarely in the classically moderate camp. Some will
Yeah.
want to label me as hypothetical universalist. That took me
Hmm.
aback a little bit because
Mm.
I thought you called yourself hypothetical universalist. So could you give us some definition? Like what is
Yes.
an
Yeah.
Amiraldian, and what is a hypothetical
Yeah.
universalist, and where do you stay? Like who, like what is, where is your
Yeah.
belief at?
Yeah. So Maurice Amoreau was a French theologian, and he was back in the middle of the debates, going on with Theodore Beza and the Arminians, and he was out what would have considered a middle way, and they called people who upheld that view as well as him Amyraldians,
Mhm.
since his name was Maurice Amoreau.
Yeah.
Um, I would differentiate myself. I mean, so if you read something like The Plan of Salvation by B.B. Warfield or different things, they'll use the term Amyraldian as kind of a catch-all phrase. It's a big basket that people have used to just represent hypothetical universalists, classicals, whatever, four pointers, anybody who would go against a strict limited atonement. And so in that sense, yes, I'm Amyraldian, but in the technical sense, I'm not, because Amaro, he was interested in quote unquote tinkering with the decrees, right? I'm just not interested in doing that. So a hypothetical universalist, I don't like those two words together. Listen, you hear that and you go, what does that even mean? Does it mean he thinks everybody's going to heaven? No, 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 of course not. It was a term given to different British guys who were delegates to Dort, around that time. John Davenant, Usher, respected individuals. And they differed, a little bit from Amyraldianism, but the conclusion of these guys was basically all the same. And that is, if you were to ask them, did Jesus suffer and pay an objectively sufficient price for the sins of all men? They'd all go, yes. Now, they might get there in different ways, with different logical steps or maybe even exegesis. So I tend to just go, hey, just call me a classically moderate Calvinist, because I would argue, as per Richard Muller and different, Dr. Michael Lynch and just different respected figures who would point out that many of the early reformers, like Ursinus, and you look at the 39 Articles of Faith, Heidelberg Catechism, I would argue Calvin, a lot of these really early guys would have affirmed, that Christ did pay an objective price for the sins of all men. So in that sense, I go, well, look, I'm not going to throw a huge fit over what you do call me, other than I don't want to be called a four pointer, because I can and I do sign on the door. So in that sense, I would be a five pointer. But so yeah, that's kind of a simple breakdown of those terms.
All right. So with that out of the way, so you would consider yourself classical. Um,
Yeah, or
now
a moderate. If you want to call me a moderate.
I'm moderate. So I have a question though.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
when we get to chapter one, so chapter
Mhm.
one, sufficient for all.
Yeah.
You do bring up the Lombardian formula.
Yes.
Um, I know that that's a I know that that's a huge thing, and
Hmm.
but I also had issues with the Lombardian formula. Uh,
Yeah. Let me hear it.
yeah, so I guess in a sense where look, I never, even when I first became a Christian, I didn't like the whole title thing. Like I didn't like to be called a Calvinist or anything. And
Right.
I remember one
Yeah.
time, like I put someone on blast because they asked me, "Are you a four pointer or a five pointer?" I was like, "Ask me if I'm a Christian first. Like ask me how
Yeah.
my prayer life is." Like I was that
Right.
guy. I was that guy. I was that guy, and
Yeah.
I look back, I'm like, oh, the Lord has worked in my life, man. Because yeah, I needed to be humbled. But anyways, look, so when we talk about the sufficiency of the blood of Christ, so
Yeah.
I correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that we're too far apart. I think at some point it gets where it's like, all right, that's your point of view kind of thing,
Right.
like,
Hmm.
so I do believe, and the reason why I'm saying, and you'll know why I'm saying this, because
Hmm.
we read chapter 2, and of course you wrote chapter 1, 2, 3, all 25, 21, um, but it does get to where I think the very, like, I'll say, like, the very root of this is
Mm.
chapter 3.
Mm.
I chapter 3 was one of my favorite chapters.
That's
Um,
interesting. Okay.
um, I really thought, because you talk about, and you even, I believe it was chapter 3 where you gave a quote of 1700s Calvinist, where it talks about, like,
Oh,
that,
Pole Hill. Edward.
yeah,
Yeah, Pole Hill.
yeah. And then, so when we talk about the sufficiency of the blood of Christ,
Yeah.
um, I wouldn't necessarily say like the Lombardian formula,
Hmm.
because as I read it here, right, it says Christ as the priest.
Yeah. This is
The
actually
Lo-
him.
this is actually him. Christ is the priest, and he is also the victim and the price of our reconciliation. Now, I'm not gonna. I agree with that.
Yeah.
He offered himself on the altar of the cross, not to the devil, but to the triune God, and he did so for all with regarding with for all with regard to the sufficiency of the price, but
Hmm.
only for the elect with regard to its efficacy,
Yeah.
because he brought about salvation only for the predestined. Now,
Mm.
when you read that at first glance, like, yeah, I agree with that,
Hmm.
but then, and this is the reason why I don't, because you, as you notice, and as you wrote in page 8, says Christ's death is sufficient for all, right?
Mm.
Like, that's pretty much the message there.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then you put amplification, so you're basically saying, like, this is what that means.
Yeah.
This is what he's saying. Christ's sacrificial death is able to meet the needs of the elect and the non-elect sin problem.
Hmm.
I'll honestly put here, that's a big jump.
Mm.
I That's a big jump.
Mm.
And if that's
Why?
what,
Explain to me. Help me understand your
yeah,
why.
for sure.
Why?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So for me is like, okay, look, so now having, the first 3 chapters in mind,
Uh huh.
for me, and of course, I'm like you said, I'm fallible. I could be wrong, and this is why I love this episode, because I get
Hmm.
to ask questions and I get to talk a lot, you know. So when it comes to the sufficiency of the blood of Christ, I do believe that it's only effective for the elect, but I don't think that it's effective for the non-elect,
That's
right?
right.
So
Hmm.
we're good there.
Yes. Yeah. Because
But
that'd be, it's efficacious or it's efficient for the
right,
elect alone. That's right.
right.
Yep.
Now, I do believe that is powerful enough,
Hmm.
right? It's powerful enough for the world or for the
Hmm.
non-elect.
Hmm.
Okay. But what I don't believe is that, and this is where it gets like what's it called? This is where it got confusing for me,
Okay.
because it's like I don't agree with him, and essentially I'm saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that of this, because it's like I said, it put me on it challenged me.
Mm.
So as I thought about it in my head, like, I was like, okay, cool, cool, but what I'm saying is that it wasn't shed for more than what it tended to be shed for.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
it is valuable, where
Hmm.
I can say to whomever, I
Hmm.
could say Christ blood has paid for your sins, and then you talk about this. So I want to hear,
Sure.
this from
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
I'm setting up myself for your response here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I appreciate it.
yeah. So, like, I could say with all honesty, like, Christ has died for you,
Mm.
and I don't know if whether this person is it's an elect or a non-elect.
Hmm.
So why am I saying this with all confidence? Is because Christ saves those whom he died for, and I don't know who that is. and you respond to this here, but with all honesty, I can say that it is powerful enough to save the people that he intended to save.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as obedient, I'm going to preach to whomever, to
Mm-hmm.
everyone,
Mm-hmm.
everyone. Now, I disagree with the term, and I think this is about that, right? So I'm gonna shut up here in a second.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
So I agree. I don't agree with saying that, okay, so it was shed for the whole world, but the whole world won't accept it. So to me, it's like I think of it this way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a little kid, like we're a very poor family. So
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have enough food. So we never wasted any food.
Mm-hmm.
So if we didn't waste any food and we're poor,
Mm-hmm.
right? The man who knows all things and died,
Mm-hmm.
like, would only shed his blood for those whom he elected. So I don't believe that he just threw all his blood and say all the ones non-elect and non-elect who wants to partake of this can have this,
Mm.
other than just the elect.
Mm.
So I don't think that, I don't know if I'm making any sense here. That
You do make sense. Yeah,
yeah,
and I think I'm tracking with you. Can I ask some
for sure.
questions?
Yeah,
Just
of course. Yes, please.
so there's a couple things there. I want to. So you brought up two things. One is, let's call it the wasted blood argument,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That'd be one, and the other one would be is, what do you mean by this term sufficient, right? I think those are, if we kind of boil it down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's take sufficient first. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Sure, sure. No,
I
no,
don't
no.
intend it. But so in your mind, are you okay with saying that Christ's sacrificial death is sufficient for the non-elect, or do you just want to drop it altogether?
No, I say that it is precious enough and it's valuable enough
Mm-hmm.
to where if that was his intent,
Mm-hmm.
it would have worked. It would have
Mm-hmm.
like it would be sufficient. But
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't his intent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the whole waste, the waste of blood argument.
Yeah. So we'll come back. The sufficiency one is a little trickier. So let me do with the wasted blood and just a couple thoughts.
Mhm.
Would you say that God loves the non-elect, that he shows love to them?
To the non-elect,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would say that. I'd say that as Psalm 7:11 says, that he's angry at them.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I wouldn't say, I think that there's a common grace.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't
Okay, so
say.
take the common grace. So God shows, I mean, there's a lot of good that he pours out on the non-elect, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Do you think he wastes that since it doesn't result in their salvation?
I rate your books. No, I do not believe so.
Okay.
I'm just gonna walk right into that one. No,
Yeah, that's all right. But we don't need to pursue it further. But
right,
I guess I
right.
would just say, in the same way that God doesn't waste his love or his patience or his common grace or anything along, like he doesn't waste an offer when he offers the non-elect the gospel, because these things are all connected to a larger tapestry that is bringing him glory.
Right.
And I would say that with the shed blood of Christ. So let's think about this with sufficiency. Um,
If I may say though,
oh yeah, please.
if I may ask a question before we go to
Yeah,
sufficient.
yeah, please.
Um, the only I guess the only thing that I would notice at that point would
Mm-hmm.
be like where we last
Mm-hmm.
like where we last talked,
Mm-hmm.
is that the blood of Christ is not like rain that rains on the elect and the non-elect.
Right.
So we're talking about something so precious,
Mm-hmm.
that that nature itself, like that creation itself, could not have done. So the blessings or the common grace that's given to the non-elect, it's very different than the blood of Christ that was shed. That, I mean, this was Christ who went to the cross and shed his blood and says it is finished. So I understand like the whole point, and I love that. But I do see a difference between the blessing or the earthly blessings, as you know, as the ones like, you know, like money or like common grace or like rain or fruits, all these things. Those are very different than the blood of Christ. So for me, it's like, it's really not a comparison. Like, yeah, he does you know, he does take glory and giving those blessings to the world. But those things are very different from the blood of Christ. Does that make sense?
I do. Yep. Yeah. So in many ways, what that terminates on, or what that boils down to, is really what the scriptures would say. Like,
Right.
if there's scriptural evidence where wasted blood would be a viable argument, then I would go, yeah. And if it doesn't, then I suppose both of us would go, well, yeah, no. So in that sense, so on sufficiency, would you say, I'm curious, because you say it's powerful enough for everyone. Is that kind of how you said it? It's
Yeah, I did. I believe I did say that. So I'm gonna stick with that. Yeah.
Well, and that's fine. Yeah, and that's fine. Powerful enough to do what?
Powerful enough to save those whom he intended to save.
I mean, with respect to the non-elect, it's powerful enough for them in what sense?
Well, I guess at that point is like, all right, like I said, it's kind of hard for me not to walk into the arguments that are within the book. But I'm gonna say this just for the sake of like moving forward with the conversation.
Sure.
It is powerful enough that if they were to believe, they would be saved.
Okay, so would you say, okay, so there's something there for them?
Right.
And what is that something rooted in?
I would say that that's rooted in Philippians 1:29, right? He calls those whom he calls them. I can't remember. I'm trying to translate from Spanish to English.
Oh, yeah. Well, do Spanish then. Yeah.
Yeah. So here, I have my English. I have my ESV, the elect.
Oh, there we go.
The elect standard version, which was one of the cool things about the book too. Like one of the notes that I have is that you say that all the quotations from the Bible that you have there are from the ESV. I'm like, okay, wise man. I keep going back and forth with NASB and the ESV, but my daily is a ESV. All right, so Philippians 1:29, for it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him but also suffer for his sake. So it has been granted. So granted to believe in Christ. Yes. So it is sufficient. It is sufficient in that sense that it's rooted in God and upon God's calling, right? So John chapter 10. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, and for the elect, I would say that's absolutely undeniable. So yeah, just for your listeners and for yourself, that kind of the argument that I'm going to develop is we have this natural inclination to say, well, yes, Jesus is enough for the non-elect. Like there's enough there that if they believe, they would be saved. But then you say, well, how could they be saved? Because I do this thought experiment where imagining a world where Jesus didn't die for anybody. There would be no gospel.
Right.
There'd be no good news. So for them, there's nothing there by which they can be saved. And so then the natural question, the follow-up is, now, wait a minute. So if he didn't die for them in that imaginary world, how is that different if he doesn't die for them in our world? It would be very, very, his death would be very powerful. It'd be infinitely valuable. But if he didn't do anything on behalf of the sins and the non-elect, then we're kind of faced with the conundrum. Either there's no salvation at all available or possible for them, which is kind of an odd thing to say, or we would go, well, or maybe there's some other way outside of Christ's atonement whereby they could be saved. And we really don't want to say that, right? I mean, I don't want to, like, the only way salvation is possible is through Christ's atonement. Without the shedding of blood,
Right.
there is no remission of sins. So what that argument, what I'm asking people to contemplate is that if we say Christ's death is really sufficient for all, if it really is powerful enough, we have to ask, well, how is it powerful enough? And is it connected to his dying for sins in some way? And I would, of course, argue that it would have to be in some sense.
Yeah. So, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, look, I like the you use an analogy or illustration about the plate with food. So,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, like going over that real
Sure.
quick, just for the
Yeah.
so that way we can.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I did say from the very beginning, and this has been my heart from the very beginning, even with other books, is that even when I do like a book interview, when I talk about a subject, that even like for me is like it's never my intent to like put people in a bad spot or ask. No, that's never my intent.
Mm-hmm.
I do want my listeners to have their own criteria, to do their own, like you said, like to be Bereans
Yeah.
and to study for themselves. At the end of the day, is like this is a subject that has been debated for a long time,
Oh, yeah.
and I don't think that Austin Brown and Tomas Portillo are going to settle this once and for all.
No,
And
there's no way.
there's no way, yeah. But I do like I said, I do like this subject because it does touch. You do touch on points or that are very challenging, and I know that there's someone out there that say, man, I wish I would have said this, I would have said that. Well, read the book for yourself, and I'm pretty sure you can reach out to brother Austin.
Oh, yeah,
um,
I'm here.
so, but as for the sake of this conversation, I do want you to bring up that one argument, that illustration
Yeah.
that you have, because I think it's a good illustration.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I disagree with it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a good illustration. So
Mm-hmm.
please, by all means.
Yeah. So chapter 3 is where it's like we're checking the math on the Lombardian formula in the sense that if Christ didn't die, let's just keep referring to them as the non-elect or non-died
Yeah.
for us. If Christ didn't die for Joe, let's just say, we have to ask ourselves, what can we offer Joe? And when he refuses it, what is he actually refusing? So if you imagine right now, see if this camera was working, you would see my hand coming out, and let's say I have an iPhone in my hand, and I say, I'm offering you an iPhone. If there's an iPhone in my hand, you would say, oh, look, he's actually offering an iPhone. But what if I put my hand out and there's no iPhone in it, and I have no way of getting an iPhone, and I say, hey, I'm offering you an iPhone, and you're like, well, where's the iPhone? You don't have one. I would say that is akin to, if Christ didn't die for Joe non-died for sins in any sense, then we have to ask ourselves, well, how can he be legitimately offered an iPhone, i.e., salvation? And when the scriptures describe him as rejecting eternal life, or when he's rejecting forgiveness, he's rejecting the gospel, we say, well, how? His rejecting it must presuppose that it exists in some sense. And so what you're talking about with the food on the plate is, if I slid a plate in front of someone with a steak on it, I would say, here's a steak, have it. And when they fling it off the table and they say, I don't want it, and we see the steak lying on the floor, you can actually say, well, yeah, they rejected the steak. So conversely, if Christ didn't die for that person,
yeah,
sins in any sense,
yeah,
then is there actually a steak on the plate?
Yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead.
basically, like the argument is that, right? Like, if you believe in limited atonement, you're offering something to, and correct me if I'm wrong, that
Mm-hmm.
you're offering something to everyone, but
Mm-hmm.
um, you're offering to some people something they don't have.
That's right.
Okay.
It
So
doesn't exist, right?
it doesn't exist. Yeah. So and then you also talk about how sometimes we say things like, well, that's not for me to know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm offering, like, I'm being sincere about what I'm offering.
Mm-hmm.
Whether there's something on the plate or not, that's up to God. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how that whole like thing
Mm-hmm. Yep.
on goes on. I like I said, it was like, it was an analogy that, or an illustration that had me going. Um, Now, not that I'm gonna like, oh, I have an answer here, and I think this is gonna destroy your argument. No, no, no. I just really wanted people to hear that, because if they're not gonna read the book, they could at least listen to that. Um, I will say this though. Do you think though that
Mm-hmm.
at some point, like I understand the whole point of offering something you don't have,
Right.
right? But it could doesn't wouldn't that be the same thing the other way around? See, I don't know whether I have it or not. I'm offering it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you do talk about this in the book. Now,
Mm-hmm.
would you say, or would you think, do you think that you're also doing the same thing the other way around?
In what sense?
In the sense,
Like,
yeah, in the sense that, so you believe that like, you don't have a problem with offering it to anyone,
right. Mm-hmm.
because because the blood was shed for them as well. Now, if they're
Mm-hmm.
rejected or not, that's
Mm-hmm.
basically up to them. Am I
Sure.
am I
Mm-hmm.
saying that correctly? Yeah. Okay. So what if
Yeah. Yeah.
what if
I'm not. Oh,
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Yeah. So I'm saying, like, what if, um like, would you be okay with, like, being wrong about this subject? I guess is what I'm asking, because you could be offering something to them, and it could be as real as the meal that Peter Pan ate in the Robin Williams movie. That
Okay.
if you think hard enough, it's there, but in reality is non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to something like that?
Yeah. I mean, it has to, on my view, it has to exist for every single person since Christ did die sufficiently for the non-elect. So that gives me the confidence that the offer is really grounded in something objectively accomplished by Christ. So I never know who is elect and who isn't, and who, therefore, who Christ died for efficiently. And in that sense, I share the same ignorance as anyone else.
Hmm.
Um, but the point of disagreement isn't over the efficacy; it's over the
Right.
sufficiency.
Hmm.
So that's really where I would come back to: is does can limited atonement, and this is the thing that people will just have to wrestle with. And I would say, these issues are like a crock pot, not a microwave. I would say take your time, think
Take your
about
time.
them, listen to different things. Because can limited atonement ground the universal offer? Because I think anybody would say that if my view is correct biblically, then it would very easily account for a universal grounding. But the question is whether it's biblically correct.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Just, I wanted to ask that question because, um I believe, like, I believe, and my conviction is right. It's very different than your conviction. So this is why I was like, I'm so grateful that you would be, even you would even have this conversation with me.
Well, I love it. I love it, brother.
Yeah. So moving forward a little bit. So because
Hmm.
we could stay here for like
Oh yeah,
a
it's
lot.
it's a
uh,
big topic.
yeah, yeah. So for me, it gets to the point where we know justification is different than 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 let me rephrase that. So we know that
Hmm.
justification is not what we're talking about here. We are talking about
Mhm.
the extent of Christ's blood, the sufficiency of Christ's blood. So,
That's right.
I wanna move forward to chapter 5. When you
Okay.
give a brief rant, could you
Oh,
tell me why? Why do you give a brief rant?
yeah. And I actually do two of them, don't I?
Yeah, you do. You do. I was gonna
Um,
bring that I was gonna bring that up later on.
yeah. So the reason I do that is because you said earlier, on the one hand, he's very playful at times, and then he gets very serious. And I wouldn't say I mean, I am being serious there, and I'm making a real point that over the course of a couple decades, interacting with on this topic, there are some men in the reformed world who are just so confident of their view that they are dismissive.
Right.
And I, we all have to be humble enough to at least engage the arguments. And so something like that brief rant is really geared towards the people who, some people are going to say, you're a heretic, you're going to hell. I mean, I've heard that. You're an Arminian. It's like, no, I'm not an Arminian.
Hmm.
You know, you basically you believe everybody's going to heaven. No, I don't I don't believe that either. So these little rants are sharp exhortations towards those people.
Yeah, and like you said in the beginning, you said, well, in the beginning of this one question, you said
Mm-hmm.
there's two rants. And I
Mm-hmm.
found it very interesting that chapter 15 says John Owen strikes back. And then right
Mm-hmm.
after that one is another brief rant.
Right.
So that's interesting. But I wanted to touch on the most obvious subject.
Okay.
For God so loved the world, he gave
Yeah.
his only begotten son to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
So could you give me with your assertion of things, with your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
conviction, how
Yeah. Yeah.
would you how would you exegete this passage?
Yeah.
This verse.
So yeah, there's a lot of different things that could be said here. Um, some people will look at they'll camp on the word world and they're going to go, ah, man, this can mean so many different things. Well, granted. Um, but first and foremost, I would say the context really does, I think, make this quite clear. And I would agree with, you know, Calvin and Dabney, and well, actually, many people in the Reformed world would take John 3:16 in its what I would say its most natural sense, meaning that the world really does mean, you know, um, the ungodly system opposed to God, sinful humanity, etc. Somebody like D.A. Carson, I think, has done good work on that. But some of the indicators in the text would be um, the reference to the bronze serpent, and the fact that it was a universal remedy or medicine, if you will. It was sufficient for all the bitten Jews, and Christ directly links that illustration to the Father sending him into the world. Another powerful one would be John's prologue, where we want to understand how he's using world, is because he at the beginning there, I don't have my Bible in front of me, so I'm just paraphrasing. But the idea is that Christ came into the world and the world didn't know him. He came to his own and his own didn't receive him.
Verse
And
14.
so
Um,
if you couple that with then John 3:17 and 18, the variety of responses, I believe, forces us to see the world as beyond the elect because we do have people reacting in unbelief. So if it's really only pointing to the elect, then how do we make sense of these two radically different responses? So that would just be a quick, I mean, there's more that could be said and more could be said about those details, but I'm just following what I would think is the most natural reading of the text.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I have another question.
Hmm.
When we talk about Colossians chapter 1,
Okay.
okay, you're not in the same camp as a lot of people, right? That Colossians chapter 1 verse 16, I believe, when he talks about let me read the verse, so
Hmm.
so I'm not guessing. Let me see here. Colossians chapter 1 verse 15. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, or rulers or authorities. So all things were created, right?
Yes.
All
Yes.
things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And then so we're, that's what it says. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in
Mhm.
everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth
Mhm.
or in heaven, making
Mhm.
peace by the blood of his cross.
Yes.
So how would you exegete that passage?
Yeah, obviously, because the reconciliation there by the because he even says it's interesting. He even says things in heaven,
Mhm.
like it's this is as universal as you get. So it behooves us to ask, well, now wait a minute. If he's reconciled all things to himself, making peace through his blood, then does hell exist? Well, the answer is yes. So that obviously creates a question in our minds like, now, wait a minute. If he's reconciled all things to himself and you're not a universalist, then what is this? What can this possibly mean? Yeah, good question. So I would just say on texts like these, there is a cosmic dimension to Christ's victory. Because not only is it a penal substitutionary sacrifice, but I would also hold to Christus Victor, for example, that Christ is the victor over Satan. And that through this act of Christ dying on the cross and being raised, that resurrection was like a coronation. It's like a fulfillment of Psalm 2. On Mount Zion I have set, you know, my king, my son, and all the kings of the earth should basically pay homage lest he break out against you in wrath. So Christ has purchased everything. It's all his. It was God's before, but it was like it was enemy occupied, right? Things were broken. Creation is groaning, as Paul would say in Romans 8. And so Christ has purchased the right, the deed, the crown rights to all reality. So in that sense, he has reconciled all things to himself. And those who do not bow the knee will be thrown into the lake of fire. I mean, they will bow the knee and confess that Jesus is Lord, but they'll do so, not in the sense of as Savior, but as a recognition of who is actually Lord of Lords. That's how I would broadly understand it.
All right, all right, good, good. Okay, so now with everything that's been said, with
Mhm.
everything that's being said, so we seem to be very close, but yet far by a mile.
Okay.
Could you, like, what would you say, like for example, right? Like I'm a K-stage Calvinist, let's say, and
Okay.
say Austin, you're completely wrong about this.
Uh-huh.
And um when you posted about the book, I read almost all the comments, and I know you probably laugh because you know it's true, that a lot of people say, "Oh, you're wrong about this," and
Yeah.
the Canons of Dort does not say this.
Yeah.
The Puritans didn't hold to this.
Yeah.
You're wrong. Your assumption is incorrect. Um, how can we, like, what would be your advice? Like, what do you blame him though for thinking that way, or do you entirely say, yeah, I think you're, would you say something like, well, you're saying that out of ignorance?
Hmm.
Like, how
You
would
know, I
you,
really
how do you,
appreciate this question.
yeah, how do you think we should, which, and the reason why I'm asking it is because I know, like, I know how to deal with it. Um, but I sincerely want to know, like, how are we to approach this issues? Like, I don't believe, and I'm being honest, and like from my
Mhm.
heart, I don't believe that you're a heretic. Some may say that you're teaching heresy. You
Right.
have made it very clear that you're not teaching universalism.
Right.
And
No.
last time I checked, universalism is a heresy. And and
Yes.
and that's why I said it seems like we're very close, but for some reason it doesn't settle very well with a lot of people. Like, how would,
Yeah.
what do you think about this whole thing?
Yeah. So yeah, I feel multiple emotions. Of course, nobody likes to be called names. So in that sense, that always hurts, especially when it's someone maybe, that I would respect. If it's a stranger on Facebook, for all I know, they're a crazy person. I mean, so in that sense, it's like, well, okay, there are those. But yeah, so on the one hand, I also recognize that not everybody has the time, nor the energy, nor the interest to go and read and see if these things are so, right? And in that sense, fine. Like, somebody doesn't have to have this issue worked out in order to be a fruitful Christian. They don't. And so, in that sense, they don't have to figure it out. This is, a bit more, the weeds are more for theological nerds. That being said, I would say that there's a certain, all of us should be in submissive to the word of God. And I would say that there's a certain simplicity um, to what I am saying. In other words, I think John 10 is really clear when he says, I lay down my life for the sheep. I think that's really clear. And I think Arminians should look at a passage like that and say, you're onto something. I think you're onto something. But I think Calvinists should also be honest and turn around and go, I think there's something about John 3:16 that's pretty clear too. Or maybe First Timothy 2:1-6. So that's what I would ultimately encourage people is take your time, wrestle with these things. We're wrestling with all of these things. We're wrestling with God in a real sense. We're like Jacob wrestling with God. That's what Israel is wrestling with God. The scriptures say all kinds of things that stump us, confound us, maybe even bother us. Last time I've, if you've read, any of the imprecatory Psalms, they make a lot of people uncomfortable. And we go, what are you up to, God? Like, what do you mean? You sound like you're saying you love the elect very specially, and you sound like you say you love everybody. So how do we put these two things together? And my honest encouragement to people would be sanctification and study is a lifelong endeavor. And if somebody comes along and says something that you think is crazy, maybe they are crazy. Maybe they are entirely wrong. Or maybe, we need to be Bereans and just keep studying these things. Because I grew up dispensational and I now am not dispensational. And I can look at all these beliefs and how church done and that I thought was right. And as I've matured and I've grown, I've come to see that there's a better way. And so that's how I view a lot of these people on Facebook. I'm trying to get their attention to shake them a little bit, to get them to look into these things. And if they ultimately come to a different conclusion, you know, I'm not their judge. God is. Um, but I would also ask for people to reciprocate that. I'll answer to God for the things I've said and I've done. And I've certainly failed and I've certainly confessed those things. So in that sense, I have a clear conscience. And I just would ask for people's patience and study is, I guess, how I would how I would answer that.
Yeah, and one of the things that helped me understand the book was that you make it very clear, I think in the introduction, where you're saying, I do believe that I am that I'm up to something. Like I have an argument that hasn't been brought up before. Um and that's why you wrote the book. I wish I had the quote in front of me so I can read it and not take you out of context.
Mm.
Um but I do, like I said, I'm being completely honest when I say that I this book did challenge me. Um and you saw me at some point, like I'm trying to be so careful in what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And and then and then what makes me like laugh about that is that you say at some point in your book, you're like, it's so much easier to be on my side. It is better on this side of the is it is better on this side. Where you're saying, I kind of hear the smirk, and saying like, hey, you don't have to be so, like, of course we have to be reverent and
Right.
be careful with the things that we say. um but in a sense, you're basically saying like, we don't have to stretch things out, and that, like, to fit those presuppositions, into the text.
Yeah.
So like I said, I'm very appreciative of it. I'm gonna read this book again, and I think that anyone who is, like, anyone and everyone who is listening, and I mean for all, okay, and I
You mean really all?
yeah, I mean
Uh,
all of them. you know, I think
uh,
that but only the ones who want to learn
right.
will buy it. You will buy it.
Right. Right. Right.
There's books for everybody.
Yeah,
Whether
it's
you want to
efficient for
reject it
all.
or not. Uh, but anyways, I do think I do recommend that you read this book. Because, like I said, even if I don't agree with it, I had such a good time reading it. And man, I don't know what else to say other than just being very grateful for this book.
Mm,
Um, man, it was sort of like, it was a very different read, let me say. Where, like, I enjoyed the read. I will admit that when I started reading it, like, I was very critical,
uh-huh.
like over critical, like, um I wasn't like just examining the book. I was like
Yeah.
trying to bust the book.
Yeah.
Um
Well, that's okay.
but like I said, the book surprised me. There's people out there who know more than I know, and may say like, Tomas, you're wrong for this, you're wrong for that, you shouldn't recommend this book. Well, I don't see why we shouldn't. I don't see why we shouldn't learn and expand our knowledge. And at least I don't have anyone telling me what brother Austin Brown believes. I heard it from him. I read his book, and I can say with all honesty, like, yeah, I know what he believes. I was confused there for a little bit because I didn't know what to call him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was Arminianism or Amyraldianism or
Right. Right.
hypothetical universalist,
Yeah.
or
Right.
yeah. But I know,
Definitely not Arminianism.
yeah, but I know for sure one thing that I can call you. It's a brother in Christ,
Well, thank you.
because like I said from the very beginning, like, this is an in-house debate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even, I will admit this. At some point in my life, I said this, and I confess it, right? Some One time someone asked me, he said, "Do you believe that Armenians are Christians?" I said, "No, they
Mm,
reject the gospel. They're not Christians. They're not my brothers."
mm,
And I take it back. I ask the Lord for forgiveness, because
mm,
sometimes the brothers love the Lord more than I could show.
mm,
And they're doing with a sincere heart. And who am I to say that, right?
mm,
Now, we will know them by their fruits. Uh,
mm-hmm.
and if they're not acting in a you know in a godly manner, we
Right.
can we can judge that.
Oh, yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to this one subject, um it's just such a it just to me it was like, all right, man, we're like really close. And like
Really
sometimes,
close.
yeah. And then I'm like, I'm hearing you, I was like, all right, just come to this side, come to this side. You're going the right path. And then boom, you know.
Yeah.
But
If I could boil it down
go
just
ahead.
for the
Go ahead.
audience, my goal is that it's not that people wouldn't say that Jesus died only, but that he died especially. That would be one. And the next would be is even if you disagree with this view, I want people to see that historically that there were respected men who espoused these things or very, very similar things. So in that sense, one of my goals with the book is even if somebody disagrees, is that I try to document with enough scholarly resources that people can go explore those and test and see whether or not these things are so, because reformed ortho reformed boundary lines, like, can you call someone who holds this view reformed? And I want someone to say, well, yes, even though I disagree. In the same way that I have post-millennial brothers or millennial brothers, or there's all kinds who would disagree with each other, over these kinds of issues, and that's okay because we're still under one tent. So I really appreciate the fact that you would call this an in-house debate. If someone doesn't agree with me, but they're willing to say that, I consider the book a success, and to the degree that maybe somebody is willing to just see John 3:16 in a different light, I would consider that a success as well, even if somebody doesn't articulate the matter exactly as I do, because you don't need to. I would say just, hey, read Dort, read Westminster, read the Heidelberg 39 articles. There's great reform creeds out there that we can subscribe to, and it does not need to be what Austin Brown says.
Right. And then like I said, like this subject, and like you said too, like this subject, it's a good subject to know. And I think it's a subject that's worth studying.
Mm.
Um, like I said, I wasn't persuaded,
Mhm.
but I'm appreciative of the content, and it was a great read. I
That's
don't,
good enough for me, brother.
yeah, and then so what I'm saying though is that I guess where I'm coming from is that I'm also like pretty I'm also like pretty tired of art of like learned arguments.
Mm,
I'm also
right.
pretty tired of like people assuming they know certain things they haven't really taken the time to read or study.
Hmm.
Um, it's just that okay, so and so says is wrong, and so name called Tomas out and said that that's wrong.
Right.
It's wrong. It must be wrong. And
Right.
if that's why you want to do it, then go ahead. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's a biblical position to have.
Yeah.
And then so
We don't want to be like we don't want to be like the Jews when they heard Paul say the word Gentile, they
mm,
go into a complete rage and want to
mm,
like destroy him, right?
right,
Like,
right.
hey, don't freak out at the trigger words.
Yeah, so I think that there is a space and then there is a balance where you can have these conversations
Yeah.
and be respectful about it. I'm not being apologetic for the book that you wrote. I mean, I think it's a great book. If you want to read it, read it. If you don't want to read it, don't read it. But if you don't read it, you don't get to give an opinion. That's all I'm
And
saying.
yeah, and let me just say, if there's anyone who is at all financially pinched, or even if you're just like, look, I don't want to spend money on something that I'm likely going to disagree with, but I'd still like to read it, reach out to me. You'll get a PDF for free. It's Money is not my objective here.
Right. And if you have any questions, you can ask Austin. You can ask him. You can send him a message. He's very easy to reach and
Yep.
very willing to have a conversation. And I wanted to do this like this episode. I wanted to do it very differently. Usually, like I'll stay more quiet, but I wanted to do this because I want my listeners to have their own opinions about things. I want them to do their own research.
Mhm.
Um, I wanted to read this book for myself, so there's that. I'm very like I said, not persuaded, but I'm very grateful for the book.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think
thank
I can say that with all honesty. And brother, is there anything that you wish you would have said in this book that you didn't? Or do you recant?
you. I do wish I would have, at the very beginning in my intro, I wish I would have framed the question more clearly. I put it in a footnote. It's like the first or second footnote, that key question. And I wish I would have kept it in the main part of the text, where what I mean by limited atonement, because it is an ambiguous term. I mean, and people do define it differently. So if I could do something different, I could rewind time, I would not have hidden that in a footnote. I would have made it more clear in the introduction.
Yeah, I do have a note here on page 9
Mm-hmm.
that A.W. Pink said, "The atonement, therefore, is in no sense sufficient for men
Yeah,
unless the Lord Jesus died for that man."
that's
So
right.
I was reading the footnotes, and yeah, if it would have been like on the, it would have saved me a lot of time too. It would have saved at least those first 10 minutes of me questioning you. But but yeah, brother, anything else besides that one point?
No, I mean, I the book is still pretty early, so I have, I'm getting feedback. Of course, people in my camp like it. A fair
Right.
number of people
Yeah,
who
I
are
know
not in the
that.
camp don't
I know
like
that.
it. So there's a lot of that, right? But there have been some people who, um, like yourself, who are like, I need to think about this more. And that's the goal, is just to drive people back to the scriptures, to study these things afresh. And then just over the years, like I said, these things are a crock pot, not a microwave. Just, contemplate them, think about them. I'm not saying go out and read all these, doorstopper theological tomes. That,
Mm.
look, life is, I mean, knowledge is good, but knowledge puffs up, right? So we have to be careful to keep our lives balanced with these things. We want to pursue Christ and holiness first. And if these things can slot in there well, I would encourage people to do that.
And I want to end with a quote from page 5.
Okay.
It says, "The key thing here is that I, along with other classically moderate Calvinists, maintain that Christ did in fact pay an objective price for the sins of humanity. In combination with this, we also hold that Christ did not die with an equal intent for all men. He died effectually for the elect as their federal head."
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's
Yes.
that's a good quote right there.
Yeah. That's my view in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
absolutely, absolutely. So just for those who were wondering what my brother Austin Brown believed, there's that quote. And I even put important. I wanted to share this quote. Um
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyways, brother, thank you so much for being part of this episode this week. Truly humbled. I'm sad that we couldn't get you on the video enough. But we got what
I
you're,
know. I'm sorry.
no. It's not your fault. I believe is the antennas, is the internet, is the internet. But anyways, brother, it was a blessing having you over. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, indeed. God bless.
God bless.